it really comes down to, is Blue-Red Devil going to be able to keep the Lords in check before they get too large to be hit with lightning bolts and that sort of thing.
And you've seen a little bit of a rise of fish in recent months. Part of it is because we have a new Lord in M13.
Correct.
Just a Lord of Atlantis 5 through 8, which means that you get to cut one of the mopey 3-drop Lords and just play more 2-drops, which is an awesome upgrade. Secondly, more of as a metagame point, because of the presence of Reanimator and Show and Tell, a very good metagame call would be, can you find a beatdown deck that can play Permission and justify playing Phantasmal Image?
Yes.
Because Phantasmal Image, very good against Show and Tell and Reanimator in general. And Merfolk is actually the perfect deck for that recipe.
Yep.
Not only are you an attacking deck with a bunch of counter spells, so you have pretty good game against the combo decks to begin with. Phantasmal Image is actually fine for your deck, even in the event that you're not playing against Reanimator, because you get to copy one of your own Lords.
Correct.
It's just Lords. It's Lords, 17 through 20 or whatever. However many Lords are in that deck.
Absolutely, and that's basically what makes Merfolk such a player right now, is that with the rise in Reanimator, Phantasmal Image's stock has gone way up.
Yes.
And it's a way that you can combat any deck that's trying to cheat a large threat into play, because most of the threats are legends. If it's Elishnorn, if it's Emrakul, if it's Gristlebrand, Phantasmal Image takes care of all of them. I know that you were at the Invitational in Indianapolis, but I was, and I went into that tournament wanting to play Merfolk before Master of the Pearl Trident was even printed.
Yes.
And the reason I wanted to play the deck was simply because of Phantasmal Image, and it was the best base to put around the card. It was kind of interesting because one of the people who top-aided, Adam Boyd, played Merfolk in the Legacy portion of the tournament, and I think he went somewhere along the lines of 6-1-1 or 7-1 with the deck in Legacy, and we came up with the deck independently. He found out that I was playing it, and I found out he was playing it, and we both shared our thoughts, and we just both came to the conclusion of Phantasmal Image is insane right now, and this is the best deck that can play it.
Yep. Hatch with a little bit extra anti-reanimator / tempo in his deck with 3 copies of Vapor Snag.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how those play in this, actually.
I think they're poor in this matchup.
Sure, I would definitely agree with that, and they're probably not in this deck going into this game 3. But as a main deck card, it's certainly good against Reanimator. That spot is sometimes reserved for another counterspell, like a Spell Pierce, or sometimes reserved for a card like Standstill, because it plays so well with the Aether Vial and Mutavault. But Greg has decided to go with Vapor Snag, so I'm interested to see how that's going to be for him throughout the tournament.
Yep.
But at least there's one thing, at least he looks good.
Oh yeah. For sure. So yeah, I actually think Merfolk was a deck that was sort of suppressed for a while. Part of it was because I believe the blue-green-red matchup was just the rug matchup was bad for them. The rug deck has bolts and better brawlers, so they can break up what you're doing. Some of those lists were playing Lavamancer as well, which is one of the worst cards for Merfolk in the entire Legacy format. Now, where there's sort of pressure to beat other decks, Merfolk has more of a place again. And of course, there is no arguing with the power of Aether Vial. A huge incentive to play this deck.
You will always find me on support of that card. I would prefer to play that card in every Legacy deck if I can. It's incredibly important to what Merfolk is trying to accomplish. It's also very good in Goblins, of course, but I actually think it's at its best in Merfolk, given the current format.
Yeah.
And we're going to see if it's going to be something along Spell Pierce. Okay, sure.
Do we have
it was going to be a
Daze?
Daze?
No.
Nope. And what's nice about Merfolk is if it doesn't rely, on Aether Vial being in play. It makes the deck much better if it's in play, but the deck can operate perfectly fine without it.
Yeah. The issue that I feel the deck has in the absence of Aether Vial is you often don't have 2 islands, and so casting your 2-mana Lords is actually challenging if you don't have Vial.
Yes.
That's the biggest problem.
That's one of the downfalls of the deck, in my opinion. And I'm sure we can talk about this after this match is over, but I've always had varying opinions on how good Wasteland is in this particular deck.
And there is the nemesis of Merfolk, #1, Grim Lavamancer.
Looking at Greg's deck, seeing what kind of answers he has to that in his sideboard. Submerge is a momentary answer. Wasteland as well to take care of the red source, as you see that just hit play.
A second Vial is going to be hit with a second Spell Pierce rather.
And Umezawa's Jit is okay if he can get it active.
Yep. Now I mean, the blue-red Delver list is actually light on lands. It's reasonable to suspect he actually might not have another red source of mana.
Sure. And just looking at the comment that I brought up, do want to correct myself.
Yep.
I said Submerge, that was a reasonable answer, but this isn't Rug. This isn't Rug Delver. This is just blue-red Delver.
So, Engel is missing a mountain and a second land drop, and Hatch is just drawing a third vial.
Okay, so he's gonna be able to get himself back into this game.
and Engel is just that wasteland. That's another thing. A beatdown deck that gets to play wasteland and counter spells. Your disruption patch is insane, and we're getting a nice clinic on it right now.
Engel, if he ever does draw that red source, I think his hand is actually full of all red cards. I know there's a Goblin Guide. There's at least one Lightning Bolt as well. And of course, Lavamancer activation. So he needs that red mana.
Just for the record, I played Blue-Red Delver in Indianapolis, and what's happening to Cory Engel right now was this happened in at least one game of every match I lost. Got wastelanded, hand couldn't function, died.
Sure.
Definitely a hole is absolutely a hole in the deck.
Okay. Is it a deck that you think should just have more blue-red duels? I mean, something along the lines of, I know Cory's deck list only has 3 Volcanics, but you want like a 4th Volcanic, some number of Steam Vents, like Shivan Reefs, something like
Maybe.
that?
I actually am not a huge fan of the Blue-Red Delver list because I think it's worse than Rug or Merfolk, depending on what you anticipate the metagame being like.
Okay.
So there is a Regery, and now with the Vial up, we might be locking out the Lavamancer if he has a 2-mana Lord, although I assume we would have Vialed out right there if we had one.
Yes.
Because then we would have locked out Lavamancer entirely. And there is a Fire Ice.
And he just has to pass back. And what's going to end up happening here, assuming that Greg has at least one more Lord or Phantasma Image or something of that nature, is that once the Lords get to a 3-3 or a 4-4, they're basically unkillable.
Yes.
Because they start making everything else large, and then the game is just practically over. And Greg, you see, is going to activate Mutavault here with this Wasteland and get in there with his team.
Yeah.
We see a Vapor Snag.
Ugh.
Hello. That's one way to deal. That's one way to deal with Grim Lavamancer.
Yeah.
Oh, this card.
It's a
It's
daze.
a daze. And this game is basically over.
That's a wrap.
I mean, and I see where you're coming from. You know, the Wasteland just on one Volcanic basically ended this game, and I know that I was going to ask you about what your thoughts are in Wasteland in this deck, but I think that based off what we've just seen, I think I know where you probably stand on the card in the deck.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that Engel might have made a misjudgment here, since he didn't have the option of getting Island Mountain off his 2 fetches. He had to get a Volcanic. Usually better off just getting a second Volcanic, because like having one island in play doesn't help you very much, especially if you're playing as like Grim Lavamancer and Bolts. Like that's how you're going to be fighting this deck. You're better off just having a second Volcanic in play. And if Hatch draws 2 Wastelands, then that is what it is. But at least you'll be able to function if he only has one.
Sure.
Like he had one island in play for a bunch of turns and couldn't cast anything because all of his reactive spells are red mana. So yeah, if those were his 2 lands, if his 2 lands' opening hand were Misty Rainforests, I'd have gone Volcanic instead of Island Volcanic.
Sure.
You would have protected yourself a little bit against Wasteland.
Yeah, makes sense.
Now Hatch has a second Wasteland, so it might not have ended up mattering anyway. He might have still gotten locked out of this game regardless, but he would have been able to fight against one Wasteland much better than he did.
Yeah. His deck would at least be able to function. There would have been at least like maybe one Lightning Bolt cast or something.
Yeah.
We're probably just going to see an activation of Mutavault and getting in with all the guys again. I would
It seems
assume.
safe. Seems safe enough.
He only has one source of red mana. We haven't seen anything crazy like Pyrokinesis or anything like that. So, I think
And the Hatch has a Pierce in hand too. It's hard to imagine this going poorly for him.
yeah. Okay, just those 2.
All right, there. Yep.
Yeah, sure. So Greg Hatch wins 2-1 over Cory Engel. Merfolk defeats Blue-Red Delver. I've typically found the match to be rather close, just because all the spot removal of Blue-Red Delver is able to keep the Lords in check.
No, Blue Red definitely has some game. I mean, especially he has Bolt, Chain, Red Blast, you know, Fire Ice, and Grim Lava Master. He's got a lot of good tools.
Sure.
Pretty much the base that you would want for playing against Merfolk. The issue is just he didn't have the ability to fetch a mountain, nor did he elect to get 2 volcanics off his first 2 fetches, and so 1 wasteland just made his hand collapse.